right, welcome everyone. I'm Lee Miller. We're going to be finishing up the book of Galatians. We have done the first two parts. This is the conclusion of Galatians. Here are the points that we're going to be covering. I'm going to give an introduction on the merits of character assassination. There's a discussion about loving your enemies, maybe not so much. What is an intra-Jewish polemic? Peter and Paul do lunch. That's Galatians 2. 4QMMT, the works of the law. 4 stands for K4. Q stands for Qumran. Next, the Holy Spirit as the key to Galatians. And then Galatians is really helpful. It talks about how life in the Spirit proceeds. Paul breaks it down really nicely. We're going to look at those. Next, we're going to look at the custodian in chapter 3. I have put the Greek word up there, Paidagogos. We're going to look at the role of Torah. Torah has a lot of roles. I'm going to look at one because it ties in directly with what Galatians is doing. We're going to review circumcision equaling conversion, the liturgical ritual of becoming a proselyte. This has been covered previously, so that's why it's just a review. Then we're going to look at an overview of the Galatians letter. The chapter that we haven't done is the one that deals with heirs and slaves. Then the verse that this is all about, 4:10, days, months, times, and years. There's different interpretations. I'll tell you what my top 6 are. And then conclusions. Let's start with how I'm going to present this. As I have said before, I feel that there are some places in Paul's letters where he could have been more clear. Okay? That's me. And I have mentioned that in groups before, that when presented with the opportunity, I have a series of questions for Paul. And I have been told to take a number. So, in working with something like Galatians, all I can do is tell you what I found and connect the dots as I'm understanding it. It doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that I've got some information, and I'm going to tell you how I think it fits. And feel free to disagree. I think one of the main things that I'm going to show is I will demonstrate how Paul has to explain Hebraic concepts using Roman principles. And I'm going to break down the Roman principles in Galatians and how he applied them to explain biblical principles. All right, the first thing is the merits of character assassination. What is character assassination? Well, I had to look it up because I wanted to be sure that I had the correct definition. It's the act of deliberately attempting to destroy a person's reputation by defamatory remarks. I found this in Collins' English Dictionary. Next, the slandering of a person, usually with the intention of destroying public confidence in that person. Got this from Merriam-Webster online. It may involve exaggeration, misleading half-truths, or manipulation of facts to present an untrue picture of the targeted person. Got that from Wikipedia online. Now, here's my question. What if the picture's not untrue? Is it still character assassination? And is that a problem? Just asking a question. Next, love your enemies. Yeshua in Matthew 5, well, I'm actually going to read that, so let me just go there. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. The verse before this, he says, you have heard it said to hate your enemies. But here's the problem. There is no hate your enemies in Torah. But there is in some of the first century halakha. So he rebukes that by saying, love your enemies. Now, Paul writes, let them be accursed. Paul writes, Let them be accursed. I ask you, is this a form of loving my enemies that I'm not aware of? It's just a question. Yeshua had his moments too. Ye serpents, generation of vipers, how can you escape hell? Is this a form of love that I'm not familiar with? Just a question. What is an intra-Jewish polemic? Well, what is a polemic? The reason that's there is because I asked my wife, do you know what a polemic is? No. And I said, well, I guess I should put that up there. A polemic is a variety of argument or controversy made against one opinion, doctrine, or person. Another variety of argument or controversy is debate. Another one is discussion. So you could have debate about a difference of opinion. You could have a discussion about the difference of an opinion, or you could have a polemic about a difference of opinion. The word is derived from this Greek word. It's Polemikos, polemikos, meaning warlike and hostile. I was like, wow, man. Okay. A polemic is a form of dispute, ready? Wherein the main efforts of the disputing parties are aimed at establishing the superiority of their own points of view regarding an issue. Now, have we ever seen that? I ask you. From the Journal of Biblical Studies, this is just a regular contemporary journal. Dr. Dunn, I've quoted him from a couple of journals. He has an article, which I'm referencing from 1993, entitled Echoes of Intra-Jewish Polemic in Paul's Letter to the Galatians. Now remember, it's a debate about how I can make my position superior to your position in a warlike and hostile manner. No one will need to be reminded that Galatians is one of the most polemical documents in all the Bible. The typical polite thanksgiving of the normal letter opening is replaced by the indignation and fiery anathema of 6 through 9. The Jerusalem opposition is described with a series of weasel words. False brothers smuggled in, who sneaked in to spy on our freedom. Jerusalem itself is identified with Hagar and dumped in the slavery column in 421. We already covered Hagar, Sarah. And the Galatians are encouraged to throw out the other missionaries, as Sarah encouraged Abraham to throw out Hagar and Ishmael. Such language and tactics are typical of factional polemic the world over. In spirit and tone, it is not particularly Jewish or Christian. That is Dr. Dunn's quote. Footnote comes from the Journal of Biblical Literature, number 108, 1989, and the article titled by Dr. Johnson was The New Testament's Anti-Jewish Slander and the Conventions of Ancient Polemic. In this discussion, this particular scholar breaks down polemic across a whole bunch of different religions, not just Jewish, but outside as well, to demonstrate how people use polemic, which is a warlike, hostile argument to show you that what I know is superior to what you know, that this was a very frequent happening thing. So Dr. Dunn quotes Dr. Johnson here. Okay, at the same time, this is continuing the quote of Dr. Dunn, there are some elements that seem to echo more specifically intra-Jewish polemic, and it is these on which this paper focuses. I put in 20 pages because Dr. Dunn's journal article was 20 pages, so just so you can know. All right, so that's where this part is coming from, and that's on page 459. If you need this article, I have it. It's on PDF. It's on my computer. You just have to send me an email requesting it. Examples. Intra-Jewish factional disputes abound in the last 200 years of Second Temple Judaism. Typically, one faction would claim to be righteous and condemn others as sinners. I don't think we go that far today, but we'll talk about it in a second. Examples of this in intertestamental writings include 1 Maccabees, 1 Enoch, and the Psalms of Solomon. Those are non-biblical books. For while sinner still denoted sustained disregard for and breach of the law, the disregard and breach were evidently more often in the eye of the beholder than not. Here's where I need you to start to pick up what I am trying to establish. I may, in my hostile and warlike yelling about how my position is superior to yours, I may be maybe more nitpicky than I should be, and that really your offense ain't all that bad, but I'm going to blow it out of proportion, okay? I need you to begin to think this way as I present. Continuing Dr. Dunn's quotes, what was at issue, in other words, was sectarian interpretation of the law. And we see this, and I've got examples directly out of the Gospels to demonstrate it. Coming up. Sectarian interpretation of the law, halakhic dispute of such intensity that the issues were regarded by the righteous, notice the righteous is in quotes, that means they're not really righteous, as make or break, as determinative of the other's acceptability or unacceptability to God. And I'm going to put myself in a position, I'm going to act it out here in a moment so that you can see what I'm demonstrating. And every once in a while I put the page number where you can see where this is coming from in the article. How many people have heard of a religious movement called Messianics? Did I spell it right? One of the problems that I have personally had as I have been learning Hebrew roots over the last 15 years is these people who come with whatever it is that they're sharing, and they are so sure that they are correct and that no one else is correct that I can hardly ask a question. And I got a serious problem with that. And I'll tell you why. I don't know how many people are sitting in this room today, but if I was a betting man, I'd be willing to bet money that not all of us agree on every theological doctrine that exists in the Bible today. I bet you we don't all agree. Who wants to take that bet? That's what I'm talking about. Here's how we have to approach it. And I've told this to the people, so I'm going to tell it to you because some of you people have not heard me speak before. But let me be perfectly clear. I can only offer you one guarantee, and that is I know that all my doctrine's not correct. That's the only guarantee I got. So as a body, I'm expecting you to help me come to the truth. Scripture requires you to do it. This is the only way I'm going to get there. Because if I do the isolation castle thing, I'm eventually going to have some problems. Maybe not the first year, but one day I will have some problems if the body is not working the way it was designed. And that's where I have a problem. Therefore, if you have a question or you disagree with something, you got to bring it. Because otherwise, you're going to continue to let me walk in error, and that's a problem. Okay? Am I clear? So I don't want to be a part of the messy antics. I want to be a part of those people who are willing to say, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to collect my data, I'm going to put it down, maybe on paper, but it could be electronic. I'm going to share it with you, and I need you to, with no expense, take red ink and tell me where I've missed it. That's what you got to do, okay? So that's what this presentation is. All presentations that I give fall into the same category. This is what I found. Do you see an error? That's why I don't want to be part of the messy antics. Good. We're on the same page. Here we go. From the Gospels, it came to pass, as Yeshua sat down for a meal, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, Why does your master eat with publicans and sinners? Now, Yeshua was sharp as a tack. Here we go. His response was, they that be whole need not a physician, but they which are sick. Bam! I like it. And then he didn't just slap them. Then he got out a shovel and dug a little hole around them. Said, go and learn what this means. I'll have mercy and not sacrifice. For I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. I mean, just like that, slap them down. I like it. To be noted once again is the fact that in the case of Yeshua, who were the Pharisees? Were they Jews? They weren't Gentiles, were they? They were Pharisees. Was Yeshua a Pharisee? No, I'm sorry, take that question back. Was Yeshua a Gentile? No, he was a Jew. So you got a Jew complaining about a Jew. So it has to be a sectarian halakha issue. And that's what I'm talking about. Although the language referred to non-Jews because it called them Gentile sinners, the issues is still within Jewish, first century. The issue of covenant loyalty, of Torah piety, of avoiding contamination by the sinner. Where does that come from? If you have read the history of the Maccabees, maybe start 50 years prior and work it all the way through to the first century, time of Yeshua's birth, what you will see is that there was attempts against the Jewish people to cause them to walk in Gentiles' ways, and they had to pull away kind of in extreme fashion, I might add, and they kind of, I don't know if they did this purposely, but they kind of laid down, this is the way you have to walk, or you are not with us. And so one of the things was the separation with Gentile sinners. And so when Yeshua sits down with a Gentile sinner to have a discussion, it's not going to meet the sectarian halakha of the Pharisees who are walking in a tighter situation. Okay, so I just want to make clear on that. Since it involved disagreement between Jews, this is still quote, on what was and what was not permissible. Obviously, these Pharisees did not think it was okay for a Jew to sit down with sinners and have a meal. So the disagreement between Jews on what was and what was not permissible in associating with Gentiles, the issue was, in fact, one of intra-Jewish factional dispute. Okay, this is all from Dunn. I'm just adding comments as I go. Here's the pages. This PowerPoint's available. You can download it directly from the web. Just go to the website. All right, now, Jubilees is another intertestamental writing. It's not part of canon, but it is part of history. The authors of Jubilees, they condemn two groups, both the sons of Israel who fail to circumcise their sons as making themselves like the Gentiles, and those Jews who used a different calendar to calculate the feast. And look what they called them. Forgetting the feast of the covenant and walking in the feast of the Gentiles after their errors and after their ignorance, because they kept a different date. This is out of the book of Jubilees. So, what is an intra-Jewish polemic? A warlike and hostile argument between Jews of differing halakhic beliefs with the intention of out-yelling one another, thereby establishing their belief as the superior one. Anybody know anybody like that? Oh, man, you gotta like it. Well, you don't, but let's go on to Peter and Paul do lunch. We're all familiar with this story, but I've put up a couple verses just to refresh you. When Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he was at fault. For before some came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to withdraw and separate himself in fear of those of the circumcision. You see the word separate I've highlighted in yellow. Why? Because what is the Hebrew for Pharisee? The separated ones. What has just happened at this lunch? Peter, like other factions within Second Temple Judaism, and that's the time period I'm talking about, the end of Second Temple Judaism, had now made table fellowship a test case for covenant identity and faithfulness. You saw it with Yeshua. the Pharisees harassing him. All right, here's another case. Covenant identity and faithfulness. And in concluding that the Gentile believers failed the test, which equals their company caused him to fail the test. He's eating with Gentiles. That means that he has not separated himself enough to meet the halakha of the Pharisees coming from James. So he withdrew from table fellowship so he would not be guilty. You see the problem? The other Jews joined in his hypocrisy, insomuch that Barnabas also was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of them all, which is really interesting because I thought there was a teaching about taking a brother aside and speaking privately about a matter, but, maybe that doesn't apply here. If you, being a Jew, live like the Gentiles and not like the Jews, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? Is that clear as mud? When I was finishing putting this presentation together, I would read this out of the KJV and I'd go, what? So I went to my library downtown here in Richmond, Theological Seminary Library, and I went through about a dozen Protestant Christian commentaries on this passage to see if, see what they said. And I'm sure you've heard it said, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, this was 12 Protestant Christian scholars, 13 opinions. They just don't know what this means because you have to remember that they're reading it from the standpoint that Galatians is the single most important letter for the law being done away with. So with that set of glasses on their eyes, they're reading this and they're going, well, I'll tell you what happened. They were having shrimp cocktail and a pig picking, and the Jews showed up, and he was like, oops, I better go over here and eat some hummus. Oh, man, I'm reading this stuff, and it's all I can. I'm in the library. You're supposed to be quiet. It's all I can do to keep from laughing. But that's not what happened here. Peter's actions said, by getting up and going over to the Jews, I cannot eat with you as far as covenant loyalty. We're talking the covenant with Yeshua. I can't eat with you as covenant loyalty because you guys are unclean and must become proselytes to become a part of the covenant. That's what he said when he got up and walked over. And what is Paul's gospel through all his letters? There is no more need to become a proselyte. Yeshua said it clearly. You go from sea to sea and you make a proselyte twice the son of hell that you guys are. That was his position on proselytes. So this is what Peter's action really said. His previous actions prior to their arrival from Jerusalem was table fellowship with the Gentiles of faith was okay. So what has happened here, Peter has had some issues, and I like Peter. I don't want you to think that I don't like Peter because I do like Peter. I especially like stuff like Peter's walking down and we're going to drag sick people out so that after he's passed, his shadow will fall on them and they'll be healed. I love that stuff. I really do like Peter. But if you read Acts 10, the Spirit falls on Cornelius' group. And what does Peter say? He's mid-sermon. He's out of the train station. He's picking up steam. And suddenly the Holy Spirit cuts him right off, fills these people, and he's like, turns to the other Jews and says, any of you guys want to forbid water baptism? Just let me know. Now's the time to speak up. That's what he says. So what does he do? You go to Acts 11. He gets back and he says, let me tell you everything that happened before you throw me in jail. And they were like, wow, this is pretty cool stuff. But it hadn't worked itself out completely. All right, so just a little, issues there had to get sorted out. All right, how many people are familiar with Qumran? There's a lot of caves there. They found a lot of documents. Paul uses a phrase in Galatians called works of the law. It never exists in any other literature until they finally found it in 4Q MMT. So we're going to take a short look at this. Once again, I'm going to quote Dr. Dunn, different journal. This is New Testament Studies, is the name of the journal, from 1997. The title of the article is 4Q MMT and Galatians. And the two copies of MMT that he refers to is 397 and 398, available for free online. The first point of interest is the self-description of the writers of the scroll. Continue to think the mindset that I'm trying to establish with you here. In the first century, we have separated ourselves from the multitude of the people. What has happened? We think that because you're stopping 3 inches short of your elbow when you wash your arms before dinner, we're going to cut you off from the assembly because you're not washing high enough. You hear what I'm saying? Could be a problem. By the way, we have separated ourselves from the multitude of people, and from all their impurity has been identified as Pharisee versus Sadducee in debate on purity because they were 3 inches short. Oh, man. The second point in MMT is a discussion of blessings and curses. If you have read Leviticus, the Torah portions, we're familiar with blessings and curses, especially today. The third point is the actual works of the law, which breaks down different things you should do. The fourth point, and this is just unbelievable right here, this fourth point. This is directly out of MMT. At the end of time, you may rejoice in finding that some of our words are correct, and it shall be reckoned to you for righteousness. What is this really? This is trying to find another way besides the cross. That's what this is. There is no righteousness outside of Yeshua and his death on the cross. Anything else that does not go that route, MMT included, circumvents the plan of God. That's a problem. The fifth point were calendar issues. There was a different calendar at MMT that differed from the Pharisees, different from the Sadducees, and I'll give you an example of that in a second. But here's a quote directly from Dr. Dunn. To sum up the 4 or 5 points of parallel, surely give us sufficient grounds for concluding that MMT preserves the sort of theological attitude and halakhic practice. I'll read it again. The parallels between Galatians and MMT preserves the sort of theological attitude and halakhic practice which in the event of Peter and Paul determined the attitude and action of Peter. So you're going to have to jettison your New Testament theology and understanding and put yourself in the first century, and you're trying to make a determination. This is how we used to do it, and you're telling me this is how we have to do it now? So this is new. Continuing Dr. Dunn's quote, the weight of the evidence does seem to suggest that MMT preserves a vocabulary, 1, vocabulary, 2, a manner of theological discussion, which left its mark on a wider spectrum of Jewish thought and practice, and that is just the sort of theologizing and practice which confronted Paul in Antioch when he wrote Galatians. Jettison New Testament, what you understand. Go back to first century. This whole thing is just starting, and your understanding is there is a separation between us and the Gentiles, and what is happening here? Why are you telling me this is changing? Next, the Holy Spirit is key. This is so fascinating. I couldn't believe when I found this article. Yes, the article is in German, but I did run it through the Google Translator. Journal of the Science and the New Testament Church of the Elderly Client. No, I do not know what that means. I was able to track down this article in English, though, and it is called The Words of the Luminaries, the Curse of the Law, and the Outpouring of the Spirit in Galatians 3, 10 through 14 by Rodrigo Morales, and all verses in here are his translations. This is the most fascinating piece of this presentation. I was like, oh my goodness, when I read this article. It was incredible. Now, I want you to look at these parallels. Remember, the only thing you have right now is Torah, writings, prophets, and some intertestamental literature. That's all you got right now. You have jettisoned your New Testament understanding because there was no New Testament understanding in AD 40. That did not exist yet. Nothing was written yet. The works of Yeshua were not written yet unless Q existed. So think Jewish. And here we go. The key question that drives this section of the letter, and indeed the majority of Galatians 3 through 6, is the Galatians' reception of the Spirit. This is directly from Paul. This is his quote. This alone I want to know from you. Was it from the works of the law that you received the Spirit, or from the proclamation of faith? Which one did you receive the Spirit? Continuing the quote. Likewise, he rounds out the first part of the argument, Paul does, by describing Christ's act of 3 points. 1, redeeming. 2, blessing. 3, Spirit. We're going to come back and deal with redeeming, the blessing, and the Spirit. Here's the quote. Redeeming us from the curse of the law, in order that the blessing might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, in order that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Direct quote from this particular scholar. That's how he interpreted that verse. Clearly, Paul sees a close connection between 1, redemption, 2, the blessing, 3, the Spirit. He says, redemption from the curse, the extension of the blessing to the Gentiles, and the reception of the Spirit. It is the Spirit, I will argue, he will argue, that plays a key role in determining how Paul understands the curse of the law in Galatians 3. Specifically, Paul's conclusion in 3:14, and I've put this underlined and in blue to set it apart, presupposes a Jewish tradition. Jettison New Testament understanding you have today. No New Testament books exist at this time. Presupposes a Jewish understanding from 3 documents. Isaiah, okay, so we got prophets. The words of the luminaries, that's 4Q, which means Qumran K4, document number 504, and the Testament of Judah. And what is in there? It presents the gifts of the blessing, the Spirit, as a sign of redemption. This is so cool. Okay, the first one, Isaiah. Dr. Hayes wrote another work called The Faith of Jesus Christ. That is the title of his book. And this journal article quotes him. Suggests in passing that Paul may join the Spirit and the blessing in Galatians 3:14 in light of a similar conjunction in Isaiah 44, the only passage in the Old Testament that associate these 2 words closely. Here is it. His book is entitled The Faith of Jesus Christ, the Narrative Substructure of Galatians. Now, Isaiah 43 describes God's promise to lead Israel in a new exodus by making a way in the wilderness for them and causing water to spring forth. That's the first point. 22 through 28 provides an account why Israel suffered. Israel had failed to call upon God to bring him offerings. As a result, God profaned the princes of the sanctuary and delivered Jacob to utter destruction and Israel to reviling. This is out of Isaiah, but I am quoting it directly from the journal. Isaiah 44:3b in the Septuagint, and I did check this, and it is this way in the Septuagint. The wording's different in the Hebrew. In the Septuagint, it says, I will pour my Spirit upon your seed and my blessings upon your children. and 4. 44, 1 through 8 speaks of God's mercy upon Israel following her punishment. So what is this thing focused on? Think for a second, linear timeline. Israel is in a state of punishment. At some point in time, the punishment is satisfied and Israel can now be redeemed. We know that's going to happen at some point in time. You're telling me it's already happened. How do I know it? Is there a blessing that's gone to the Gentiles and they are coming in? Because that's one of the prophecies. Has the Spirit been given? Because that's one of the prophecies. That's the only thing I know as a Jew in the first century. Are the Gentiles called and has the Spirit been given? Because if those two things have taken place, redemption has taken place. That's what I know as a first century Jew. Let's go to the K4 document, Words of the Luminaries. And you did not desert us amongst the nations. You did favors to your people Israel among all the countries amongst whom you had exiled them, to place upon their heart to turn to you and to listen to your voice, in agreement with all that you commanded through the hand of Moses, your servant. That's from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Continuing that document. For you have poured your Holy Spirit upon us to bestow your blessings to us. He says, the words of the luminaries associate the gift of God's Spirit with the restoration of Israel after its punishment for failure to keep the covenant. All right? Jettison New Testament baggage. The only thing I know is if God's Spirit has been poured out and the Gentiles are called to the Most High, then the redemption of Israel and their punishment has been satisfied, and they are now in a place where they can be redeemed. That's all I know in the first century. Drawing on Isaiah 44, which this document does, the prayer presents Israel's reception of God's Holy Spirit and the blessings as the sign that God has redeemed Israel from the curses of Leviticus and Deuteronomy that we're going to discuss today in the Torah portion. All right, let's do the last document, the Testament of Judah. In chapter 23, Judah laments the sins his sons will commit and the resultant punishment they will receive. Here's the quote from the Testament of Judah. And the heavens will be opened upon him, I have put in there a messianic figure, to pour out the Spirit as a blessing of the Holy Father. And he will pour out the Spirit of grace on you, and you shall be sons in truth, and you will walk in his first and final decrees. This document existed long before Yeshua was even born, and this is what they knew. Following the text proceeds to depict the resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the promise to the kingdom to the sons of Israel. We've seen that in Micah 4, Zechariah 14, Isaiah something, which escapes me right now, and there's probably some other prophets that also talk about the resurrection and the establishment of the millennial kingdom. Okay, now back to Paul. Paul interprets the Spirit as the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham to bless the Gentiles as the long-awaited sign that God has finally redeemed Israel from the curses. This is just cool, okay? So do you see how I'm understanding this? I don't know anything about the New Testament. I barely know anything about the work of Christ. But I know that when the Spirit falls and the Gentiles are called, Israel's punishment has been satisfied. That's the only thing I know. And here Paul, in Galatians, if you remember chapter 3, he builds this case on Abraham. And he talks about, he quotes Genesis 15:5 and 15:6. which talks about Abraham becoming informed of the work of the Messiah. We already covered that in a previous teaching. And he establishes that this is who we're lining up to, is Abraham. And here, this particular journal article I'm quoting, he interprets the Spirit and the blessing to the Gentiles as the sign. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you about the Holy Spirit being key to understanding what has happened in this intra-Jewish polemic debate that Paul's writing in Galatians. All right, how does the life in the Spirit proceed? This was too good to not include. Verse 13, brethren, you have been called to liberty. Only do not use that liberty for an occasion to indulge the sinful nature. All right, first question. It sounds like to me that even though you are called, you still have free will choice to indulge the sinful nature. Is that reasonable? 16, this I say then, walk by the leading of the Spirit, you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. Sounds like to me that within us is the ability to carry out the desire of the flesh, should we choose to not walk by the leading of the Spirit. 18, but if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the penalty. That would be the redemption penalty that we just studied. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. What that tells me is that I have a choice to not walk in the Spirit. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Sounds like to me I have a free choice on how I want to live my life after I've experienced redemption. He that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. He that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. That's KJV quote. From this, I come away with, has the Spirit fallen? Yes. You'll see that in a moment. Have the Gentiles been called? You see it, yes. Especially Acts 15, which we've already covered. James' whole thing was finding out where the Gentiles are called. All of that has put us in place. Redemption has been accomplished. So, am I in? Not yet. If I continue walking this path, yeah. But I have the free choice to not walk in the truth. So I'm not in yet. Continuing. The custodian of chapter 3. Paul wants to explain to his audience, and remember, these guys are relatively new in their faith. You can see that by Acts, I think it's 13. Somewhere around Acts 13, Paul goes in there, and I think he heals some people. And what they want to do is they want to build a bunch of idols and worship Paul right there on the spot. I believe is the story as it was related in Acts. So these guys are new in their faith, okay, and he wants to explain the role of Torah prior to accepting Yeshua. Paul will use an element from their own culture to make a biblical point. This is from the Greek dictionary, Vincent, available for free online. The law is here represented as an overseer or guardian, to keep watch of those committed to its care, to accompany them with its commands and prohibitions, and to keep them in a condition of dependence and restraint. Now, I'm going to pay to go-go's. I don't think that's correct, but that's what P-A-I-D-A-G-O-G-O-S, that's how I would pronounce it. Originally, boy leader, the man, usually a slave, whose duty it was to conduct a boy or youth to and from school and to superintend his conduct, generally speaking. When the young man became of age, the guardian should no longer be needed because the child has learned. The guardian would try to instill in the boys a basic sense of who a responsible citizen was until the boys were old enough to take care of themselves. This is what the Greek word means. This was taken from Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature, BDAG. Okay, another. Our sharp-eyed and efficient supervisor of the education of the young must redirect their natural development along the right lines by always setting them on the paths of goodness as embodied in the legal code. That's what this Greek word means, and look who wrote this. Plato, 4 centuries before Christ. This word had not changed a whole lot. Roll of Torah. This is a quote. I'll tell you who the quote is from at the end. For the unredeemed, the Torah was intended to preserve the mental, moral, and social safety of the environment into which an individual was born and raised. The person was protected until the date set by the Father, when the Spirit of holiness would lead them to the teacher, the Messiah. The Torah does this by providing a safe environment in which they may live. The judgments, commandments, ordinances, and other teachings of the Torah all help to create a safe community surrounded by the border of the Torah. Anyone who lives within the confines of that border will live in relative safety. This does not mean that the person living within the borders of the Torah is automatically saved. Rather, living within the Torah community, the life is being preserved and protected as he awaits the time set by the Father. This is using a Greek word to understand a Hebraic concept. This quote comes from a book, Torah Rediscovered. Review of circumcision. This is 5:1-3. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty where Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. Really? For I testify again to every man that is circumcised that he is a debtor to do the whole law. What did we learn about this section? Circumcised does not mean the cutting of the flesh. Every man means every man and woman. That means it cannot be talking about the cutting of the flesh. We already looked through this and discussed that this actually means becoming a proselyte. And when you become a proselyte in the first century, you become a debtor to not only the Torah, but the interpretation of the people who are providing you with the traditions on how to obey it. That was a problem, because within that sectarian halakha was you cannot have table fellowship with the Gentiles unless they become a proselyte. That is unacceptable within the realm of what Yeshua established. All right, so let's overview the entire Galatians letter. Who is Paul and why you need to know? Paul starts out in chapter 1, and he says, I did not get what I taught you from man. I got it directly from the Most High. So what I'm bringing you is not something that I learned sitting under some person. So you need to know that. My relationship with the pillars. Who are the pillars? James, Peter, and John were the pillars. And his relationship was that he went there and submitted himself to say, this is what I have received when I went to the third heaven. Am I running my race in vain, or am I good to go? Why I yelled at Peter? He yelled at Peter because Peter had a moment of weakness in his fear of what was going to happen when some guys came from Jerusalem and saw him eating with Gentiles who were not proselytes yet. He just was a little concerned, and Paul tried to fix that. The MMT mentality is not the way to go. Why? Because there are no commands that you can exercise in your flesh that are going to provide you with right standing before God. There is one way and one way only to get that, and MMT is not that way. 6, the big question, Galatians. Paul asked them, tell me this one thing. Did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law or by faith? 7, Torah is important, But we must not overlook the order established with Abraham. When Abraham in 15:5 and 15:6, 15:5 is where in Genesis 15:5 Abraham finds out Yeshua, his sacrifice, is the atonement and redemption of Israel. In 15:6, he believes it. It is accounted as righteousness to him. Had nothing to do with obedience to Torah. Not at that point. Did he obey Torah? Yes. 26:5 says that he obeyed Torah. And we see other places where he obeyed Torah. But what we have to realize is that Abraham came along and believed the work of Yeshua before the Torah was given to Moses. Okay, so he establishes that in Galatians 3. We cannot overlook the order. The role of the guardian. We just saw that. Roman patria potestas. One of the things that was currently existing in this section of Asia Minor under Roman law was the way that you deal with a child who is to inherit your estate but is not ready to do it yet because they have not reached an age or a date set by the father. This is a Roman principle. And Paul uses this because these other missionaries who came in after him to Galatia were telling them that you have to become a proselyte to be able to become a son and heir. And that is not correct, and we're going to break down Galatians 4. He tells them at the end of Galatians 4 to reject the false missionaries. He says in 5:1 through 5, if you go the proselyte route, it equals falling from grace, because you have said that I will establish my right standing with God through my works and not through the cross. And finally, number 12, Paul says, if you will just let the Spirit work within you, what is the fulfillment of the prophecies? Jeremiah 31, Ezekiel 36, I think also Ezekiel 19. I will put my Spirit within you so that you will obey my Torah. When the Spirit comes in, you begin to change. You have to make right choices? Yes, I'll grant you that. But the work of the Spirit changes your character so that your Torah becomes a part of it. You've just got to let the Spirit work. Let's go ahead and break down the heirs and the slaves. What I want you to think about, as Paul's writing this letter, these false missionaries have come in and they have given them a skewed message, saying that you are not an heir yet until you become a proselyte. The last verse of chapter 3 says, after talking about the Abraham stuff, heirs according to the promise, not according to the cutting of flesh. The heir, as long as he is a child, differs not from a slave as far as execution of the business of the estate, even though legally, by right of birth, he will be Lord of all, under supervisors until the time appointed by the Father. That's the Roman principle. So we also, when we were children, we were in bondage under the elementary matters of the world, being enslaved. And this is a whole discussion of itself. I wrote this here, so when you look at it, all things had their special angels. Vincent gives a very lengthy explanation of the role of angels, scriptural and non-scriptural, that were part of the halakha of the first century that was a mess. 4. When the fullness of time was come, God sent his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because you are, I looked up the Greek tense here. It's not you will become. It's not future tense. It's present tense. Because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your heart. So he concludes in verse 7, wherefore, you're not a servant anymore according to the Roman principle, but you're a son. And if you are son, then you are an heir. You do not have to become a proselyte to become an heir. Abraham was not a proselyte, and he was an heir. You are now sons of Abraham according to the promise. He says we are already heirs. We don't need to MMT our way to be an heir, which really means you don't have to try to execute the law according to an established halakha to be a son. That's not going to get it done. So, formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. He discussed that in verse 3. But now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you are turning back to those weak and miserable principles? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? That sounds kind of big, doesn't it? You are observing days and months and seasons and years. I put in parentheses for a reference, not like Colossians 2:17, which we covered and I'll review in a second. Now, this is a quote from Dunn's article. I already read it to you, so you're familiar, but listen to it again. The polemical denunciation already noted above, to observe a feast on the wrong date, was not to observe the feast, but to forget the feast of the covenant and walk in the feast of the Gentiles after their errors and after their ignorance. And there were some worse quotes that I didn't put in here. But what I want you to understand is in the intra-Jewish debate, if you were observing the wrong date, you're not observing any date. You're just a Gentile sinner. To commit sin like the sinners. First Enoch. In Mark, how many are familiar with this story? They went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and the disciples are rubbing the grain, and you know that that's legal. So what did they say? Why are your disciples doing something that's not lawful? It was lawful according to Torah, but it was not lawful according to their sectarian halakha. Another example. And they watched him, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day. Why? So that they could accuse him. But is healing on the Sabbath okay? Yes, but not according to their sectarian halakha. So we see this. The last verse, I fear for you that perhaps I have labored over you in vain. This goes back to the working of the Spirit in 5:13 to 6:8. It appears that even though they were in and experienced the Spirit, they could turn and walk away. The calendar they are keeping, which is different from the Hebraic calendar he taught them, tells him that they have fallen for the MMT path, which means no more dependence on the Spirit, but switching to the flesh to accomplish heirship. I'm going to give you an example of this. Omer. In the bulletin, you will see it says, remember to count your Omer. I have it right there in the bulletin. All right, now, first century, I'm a Sadducee. You're a Pharisee. I go to you and I say, hey, man, how's the Omer counting going? And you go, oh, it's going good, man. Today's 32. Well, I'm a Sadducee. I don't say this, but I'm thinking to myself, I'm a Sadducee, and I know it's 28. So what is my position? You Gentile sinner. You are lost from the faith. You are going to burn in hell forever because you're keeping the wrong calendar. This is how they did it back then. I don't know how they survived. If we did this, I know we do some of it, but we're not this bad yet. We're not this bad. Even though we may know of people who are messy antics, we are not this bad. You know what my approach is to Omer 28:32? I'm a Sadducee, you're a Pharisee. I'm going to say, brother, I think it's 28. And he says, well, I think it's 32. And I said, well, you know what we ought to do? Let's get together. I'm going to show you what I have found that translates into 28. And if you will show me what you have found that translates to 32, then we can share notes and come to a knowledge of the truth. Glory to God. Did anybody think of this? I'm telling you what. I just, when I read it this way, now, like I said before when I started, I'm not saying this is true. What I'm saying is we know beyond a shadow of doubt that Paul was teaching the Gentiles to keep the Jewish calendar. We already established that in past teachings. And I put Colossians 2:16 and 17 there to be very clear that the Protestant Christian position that he's chewing out the Gentiles for keeping the feasts that aren't shadows is bogus. We already exposed the NIV translation for changing the verb tense from present to past tense, so anybody who reads their Bible will read, the festival, new moons, and Sabbaths were a shadow of things to come, to give people the impression that they have been fulfilled and done away with. We know that that is fraud. We already have exposed that. Instead, what he's saying is, do not let anyone judge your eating and drinking at the festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths, except the body of Christ. And I presented Protestant Christian scholar after Protestant Christian scholar who is looking at the new perspective of Paul. That's a link on my website. That shows you that after the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of the Protestant Christian position on Paul's relationship to the law is being reevaluated, and now they're finding out, yeah, he kept the law, yeah, he taught the law, and we see it all the way into the end of the 2nd century. I taught that 2 weeks ago. So here in Galatians, it's the same thing. Paul's coming in. He's with these guys, and let's just say Paul's a Pharisee. Let's just go there for a second. So he's doing 32, okay? And he's watching them, and they're doing 28. Let's just pretend, okay? And he's saying, you guys are off because you're on the wrong calendar. I know the calendar of these other guys here, and they're doing 28. Now, I'm not saying that's correct or incorrect. I'm just go with my example. If he sees them doing something that's outside of what he taught and knows that that thing is related to what they teach, he knows they're following the wrong people. And so he's getting on them. If you are doing this, that means you're following them, which means that you're doing your righteousness in the flesh, and you're not allowing the Spirit to work. And that's what I think is happening here in this letter. He wants to get these people back on track. You're already in error. Give it up. You're here. Let the Spirit work in your life. Conclusions. Here is my conclusion. Paul should have left somebody at that place to keep them people straight. That's my first conclusion. You know, this was tough for them. This was tough. They were in, they got the Spirit, they're moving and stuff. These other guys come in. Paul, did you not have a clue this was going to happen? That could be one of my questions. So he's got to go back there and fix it with this letter. All right, so what I am seeing is he gave him the truth. Then he worked his way through what we call 6 chapters in explaining that he didn't get it from man. Don't let Peter mislead you. Follow the order established by Abraham. You're already an heir. Throw the missionaries out like Hagar. Do not accept proselytism because you will fall from grace. Please give the Spirit a chance to execute in your life to be changed into His image. That's what I think the Galatians letter is teaching.